A week after my son Matthew got married, my daughter-in-law Brooke knocked on my door, accompanied by a well-dressed man carrying a leather briefcase. "Mom, this is Paul, a notary." She flashed that phony smile I knew too well. "We're here to help you with some house paperwork." My heart pounded. I knew exactly what they wanted, but they had no idea what I had quietly prepared over the past few months. Thank God I had kept quiet about the ranch assets my late husband left me in his will. Watching Brooke flip through my documents with greedy eyes, I realized silence had been my shield. But to tell it fully, I have to go back to the day everything began to change. 3 months earlier, when Matthew told me he was going to marry Brooke, I was kneading dough in the kitchen. The smell of fresh yeast filled the room while my hands pressed into the warm dough. "Mom, I want you to really understand Brooke before the wedding," Matthew said, with that smile that always softened my heart. "My son, my only treasure, has finally found love," I replied, wiping my hands on the apron. I'd heard plenty about her. 32 years old, office job, brown hair always sleek, perfectly manicured nails. She sounded like the perfect woman for Matthew. That afternoon, I ran to the supermarket to pick the freshest things: large shrimp, perfectly ripe avocados, herbs, heavy cream. I wanted to cook the dishes Matthew had loved since he was little. In my head, I imagined the conversations I'd have with Brooke, the advice to keep my son happy, the family recipes the two of us might share. I stayed up nearly all night cooking. My feet swelled from standing so long, but I didn't care. The clam chowder I made was silky and rich. The cornbread was fluffy. The avocado salad was refreshing. The apple pie was fragrant with cinnamon American dishes my family has always loved. When it was time to meet, I put on my prettiest pink dress, the one I saved for special occasions. I did my hair carefully and even put on a little lipstick. I wanted to make a good first impression after all. This woman might be the mother of my future grandchildren. The doorbell rang, and my heart leapt. I opened the door with a wide smile. "Brooke, it's so nice to meet you." I opened my arms for a hug, but she only brushed my shoulders with her fingertips, as if touching me were unpleasant. "Nice to meet you, ma'am," she murmured without looking me in the eyes. Her voice was cold and distant. She wore an elegant green dress, and her high heels clacked on the floor of my modest home like tiny hammers. During dinner, I tried to chat about her interests, her job, her plans with Matthew, but every question I asked got clipped one-word answers. Yes, no, maybe. Talking to her felt like talking to an ice wall. What hurt me most was the way her eyes swept around my house with disdain, the way she wrinkled her nose when tasting my food, as if it were something inferior. Matthew tried to smooth it over. "Mom, the food is delicious as always," he said, trying to dispel the awkwardness, blanketing the table. Brooke poked at the beans on her plate with her fork, separating each ingredient as if dodging poison. Her glossy red nails contrasted completely with my simple ceramic dishes. "Do you like cooking, Brooke?" I asked with a hint of hope, pouring more sauce onto her plate. She looked up, her expression hard to read. "I don't have time for that," she answered flatly. "I prefer ordering in or going to proper restaurants." The word proper stabbed my chest like a splinter. So my food wasn't proper. My home wasn't proper either. Matthew cleared his throat and hurried to change the subject, but I'd already gotten the message. To Brooke, everything of mine was beneath her. In the following weeks, each visit grew heavier. She perched on the edge of the couch, as if she'd get dirty, eyes glued to her phone with a bored expression. She never asked about my day. She never showed any interest in truly getting to know me. "Mom Suzanne, you'll be happy to have more time for yourself after we get married, right?" She dropped one day while I was making coffee. It sounded like an early goodbye, as if she'd already decided to separate Matthew from me. "More time for myself?" I repeated, confused. "I like being with you too." She glanced at Matthew, the look I didn't understand then but understand all too well now. They were already planning to sideline me. Wedding prep turned into my personal nightmare. Brooke decided everything without asking me, as if I were invisible. "Have the cleaning lady help with the flowers," I heard her say on the phone one time. It took me a few seconds to realize she meant me, the one who usually tidied up and cooked whenever my son visited. When I offered to bake the wedding cake myself, a family tradition we'd kept for generations. Brooke let out a laugh that chilled my blood. "Oh no, Mom, let the professionals handle that. I don't want anything homemade." That night, I sat in the kitchen and cried, clutching the apron my own mother gave me when I got married. My cakes had sweetened birthdays, baptisms, graduations. But to Brooke, the love in every batch was just homemade, a word she pronounced like a disease. The wedding day arrived like an unavoidable storm. I got up before dawn to get ready, choosing my most elegant purple dress. I'd bought it just for this occasion. I stopped by the neighborhood salon. Carol gave me a hairstyle so pretty I looked 10 years younger. "You look beautiful, Suzanne," she said while adjusting my hair. "Your son will be so proud." Her words lit a small hope. Maybe today would be a new beginning with Brooke. I arrived at the church early, the way I always arrive early everywhere. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for my son. Guests began to arrive, and I received their congratulations with a genuine smile. But when the ceremony began, I realized something that broke my heart. Brooke had arranged the seating so I was pushed to the 5th row behind her coworkers, behind neighbors who had only met Matthew a few times, while the groom's mother sat way in the back, like a stranger. From that row, I had to crane my neck to see my own son walk up the aisle. The mothers of Brooke's friends, women who had never stayed up a night with Matthew's fever, had better seats than I did. I swallowed hard and kept my composure, but something inside me cracked. At the reception, it got worse. Brooke introduced me to her guests as Matthew's mom, never using my name, or saying mother-in-law, respectfully. "She cooks really well," she added with that fake smile, compressing my entire life into a kitchen function. When it was time for toasts, I waited patiently. I'd prepared heartfelt words about my different son, about watching him grow, about my blessings for his new life. But Brooke conducted things like an orchestra director, calling on her parents, her siblings, her best friends, even coworkers. "What about the groom's mother's toast?" someone asked. Brooke glanced my way and smiled icily. "Oh, yes, Miss Suzanne can say a few short words. Short, as if my 69 years of life and 30 years of motherhood were worth only a few lines." I stood up, legs trembling, feeling every gaze on me. I want to thank God for this special day. I had barely reached the second sentence when Brooke started clapping, cutting me off. Others followed, and my voice was swallowed by the forced applause. For dinner, they seated me at a back table with Brooke's distant relatives, people who chatted among themselves as if I didn't exist. From there, I watched Matthew laugh with his new family, absorbed in his new life, while I chewed a piece of chicken as bland as cardboard. When the dancing started, Matthew danced with Brooke, then with her mother, then with her sisters. I sat still, smoothing my dress, trying to keep my smile from fading. The song ended, and my son never looked my way. "Not dancing with your mom, Matthew?" Anthony, Rachel's husband and a close family friend, asked as he stopped to say hello. Matthew laughed awkwardly. Yeah, in a bit. But in a bit never came. Close to 11 p.m., I decided to say goodbye. I had to drive home and was tired of pretending everything was fine. Son, I'm going to head out. I touched his arm lightly. He hugged me quickly, eyes already following the music and laughter. Thanks for everything, Mom. I love you. But he was looking elsewhere. Brooke appeared beside him like a possessive shadow. Thanks for coming, Mom, she said. Her tone sounded more like a permanent farewell than gratitude. I walked to the parking lot, holding my purse and the gift I'd prepared. With so much love. Behind me, I heard Brooke whisper to her friends, "Good thing she lives far away." She's not a bad person, but you know how mothers-in-law are always wanting to have a say in everything. Their giggles followed me all the way to my car. I got into my old car, hands shaking, eyes brimming with tears. For 30 years, I was the center of Matthew's world, and in a single night, I became a nuisance to be gotten rid of. The drive home felt endless. Highway lights blurred through the tears I finally let fall. A love song played on the radio, reminding me of dancing with my husband at our own wedding, the day he promised to always protect me. But now, I faced this new reality alone. I got home after midnight, feet swollen, heart shattered. I took off my shoes at the door and walked barefoot to my room, feeling the cold floor against my tired soles. The next morning, when Brooke and that so-called notary showed up at my door to help me with the house paperwork, I simply smiled. They didn't know that this Suzanne, a 69-year-old mother in Seattle, was no longer someone to be led around, and the real story was only just beginning. The purple dress I had so carefully chosen suddenly felt ridiculous, like a uniform for an old woman pretending she still mattered. The next days were a strange mix of silence and waiting. I hoped Matthew would call to tell me about the honeymoon, to check on me, to keep the bond that had held for 30 years. But my phone stayed dead quiet. A week after the wedding, I decided to call myself. "Hi, son. How are you two? Was the honeymoon good?" I tried to sound as cheerful as I could. His answer was icy. "Great, Mom. Brooke sends her regards. I'll call you later. We're busy sorting out the house stuff." The house. He didn't say our house or my house, just the house, as if I had never existed in his family world. I hung up, lonelier than ever, looking at the photos of little Matthew all over the living room, the bright-eyed boy who would run to hug me every time he came home from school. Now he was a stranger sending regards through his wife. 3 more days passed with no news. I decided to bake a batch of chocolate walnut cookies, his childhood favorite, as an excuse to visit. I dressed neatly, put on my favorite mint green blouse, and drove to the new house in Bellevue with my heart full of hope. I rang the bell, hoping to see my son smile, but Brooke opened the door. She was wearing a wine-colored silk robe that looked expensive, her hair in a perfect bun, as if she'd just left the salon. "Oh, Mom, what a surprise," she said, without a shred of genuine joy. "I brought cookies for Matthew." I held up the gift basket tied with a yellow bow. His favorite. Brooke took the basket without inviting me in, inspecting the cookies like evidence of a crime. How thoughtful. Matthew is in a very odd, important meeting. I'll let him know. I stood right at the threshold, feeling like a rejected salesperson, waiting for at least a glass of water or a simple, "How are you?" But Brooke was already closing the door. "Thanks for the cookies, Mom. Have a nice day." The slam door sounded like a verdict. On the way back, tears blurred the windshield. I pulled over to cry freely, pounding my wrinkled fists on the steering wheel. How had I let it get to this? How could I let that woman so easily snatch my son away from me? That night, eating dinner alone in front of the TV, I suddenly remembered what my late husband told me before he passed. Suzanne, if anything happens to me, don't let anyone trample you. You're stronger than you think, and you have more than you imagine. I hadn't fully understood then, but now those words began to come clear. The next morning, I did what I'd neglected for months. I pulled out the safe from the closet, opened it, and organized the 7 papers: birth certificates, marriage certificate, house title, insurance policies. Then I saw an envelope that would change everything. The deed to a ranch of about 500 acres that my husband had inherited from his uncle and that now belonged entirely to me, a ranch in eastern Washington. The legal language was very clear. I was the sole owner of one of the region's most profitable ranches. My heart pounded as I read the details: farmland, cattle, a main house with 5 bedrooms, and 3 houses for workers, guests. The most recent appraisal was enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life and still leave a substantial inheritance. But more important than money was power. The power to decide my own future, to depend on no one, to stop begging for affection or picking up scraps of attention. For the first time in weeks, I truly smiled. I put the documents somewhere safe and made a decision. I would tell no one about these assets, not Matthew, and certainly not Brooke. My gut told me this would be my ace up the sleeve, my lifeline when the time came. And that very week, my instincts proved more accurate than I imagined. Brooke started calling me constantly, but not to check on me or invite me to dinner. Her calls had a very specific purpose: to mine for information about my house and finances. "Mom, Suzanne, Matthew and I think you might be more comfortable in a smaller place," she cooed. "This house must be a lot of responsibility for someone your age. Have you thought about selling and moving to an easier-to-manage apartment?" Her words gave me chills. The subtlety of suggesting I get rid of my home was frightening. "No, I'm very comfortable here." I kept my voice gentle. "This house holds too many beautiful memories." "Sure, but think it over. If you sell, you could enjoy yourself, maybe travel. We can also help you manage the money so it earns more," Brooke continued in that syrupy tone I'd begun to hate. 2 days later, Matthew came by for the first time since the wedding, not just to visit his mother, but with a very clear agenda. He sat on the sofa where I used to hold him when he had nightmares. "Mom, Brooke and I have been talking about your future." "My future?" I feigned innocence, though I already knew where this was going. Matthew avoided looking me in the eye, just like when he was little and had done something wrong. "We think this house is too big for you. Lately you seem tired, stressed. Brooke knows a great agent who can appraise it and get a good price." He fidgeted with his car keys, awkward. The pain hit like a knife twisting in my chest. The very child I'd raised with all my love was trying to convince me to sell the house where he grew up, where he took his first steps, where we built every memory. "Son, do you really think I should sell the house?" I asked directly, needing to hear his voice, not Brooke's echo. For a moment, I saw the round, vulnerable little boy he used to be, hesitating, caught between what he knew was wrong and what his wife had put in his head. "Well, Brooke has a point, Mom. You should enjoy more, worry less," he muttered. But his voice sounded like he was reading a script someone else had written. That evening, after Matthew left with empty promises to visit more often, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea and made a decision that would change everything. I called Rachel, the only close friend I could trust completely. "Rachel, I have to tell you something very important, but promise it stays between us." Rachel's voice turned serious immediately. We'd been friends for more than 40 years, practically raising our kids together. "Okay, Suzanne, what's going on?" "You sound worried." I told her everything from Brooke's attitude the first time, how they treated me at the wedding, the attempts to convince me to sell the house, and finally the ranch assets I'd kept hidden. "My God, Suzanne, nearly 500 acres and you haven't told them?" Rachel exclaimed. "Good thing you kept quiet." I saw the shark look in that girl's eyes at the wedding. Her words confirmed my instincts were right. "Rachel, I feel like something bad is coming. The way they look at me like an obstacle to remove. I'm afraid they're plotting." "Listen, best friend," Rachel said in her familiar firm tone. "Tomorrow morning we're going to see a lawyer. You need to protect everything before those vultures find out what you really have. And please don't sign anything without checking with me." The next morning, Rachel picked me up early. She had made an appointment with a reputable attorney, Mr. Robert Hayes, whose office was in downtown Seattle, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and decades of handling similar cases. "Miss Suzanne, based on what your friend said and the files I've reviewed, your situation is very sensitive," he said after going through the papers. "It's not uncommon for relatives, well-meaning or not, to pressure older adults to transfer assets. My recommendation is to build legal safeguards around your entire estate." Mr. Hayes spread the documents into a picture of assets on the polished wooden desk. "What you have is substantial. This ranch alone equals the entire wealth of many families." He adjusted his glasses. "What concerns me is the behavioral pattern you've described. Emotional isolation, making the victim believe she's incapable, then presenting the solution, which only benefits them." His words made me shiver. This was exactly what I was living through. Rachel squeezed my hand. "Tell him about the notary." I recounted how Brooke brought Paul to my door, waving house papers, showing up unannounced like hunters on a trail. "Classic," the lawyer muttered, taking notes. "They often bring along a friendly witness, notary, overlook irregularities, and pressure for signatures under the pretense of simplifying procedures. I've seen people lose everything in a single signing session. So what can I do to protect myself?" I asked, feeling like I was standing in the middle of an invisible battlefield. For the first time that day, he smiled. "A lot. We'll set up an irrevocable trust, document any coercive attempts, and most importantly, prepare scripts for when they show their true intentions." We left the law office with a clear plan and a set of documents strong enough to wrap my estate in protection. This time, I was no longer a mother easily led around. Suzanne of Seattle was ready to fight back. More important than anything, I walked out of the law office with one certainty: I wasn't overreacting or paranoid. My suspicions had a basis. Rachel invited me over for a meal. Her husband, Anthony, hugged me with his familiar bear hug. "Suzanne, that girl has money in her eyes," Anthony said, as we ate the pot roast Rachel had cooked. "Even at the wedding, I felt something off," he continued. "She kept calculating, probing about who did what business." Their observations confirmed my worst fears. In the following days, I kept my normal routine, but on high alert. Every call, every unexpected visit, every casual remark about age or needing help, I read in a new way. It was as if I'd suddenly developed X-ray vision to see the true intentions. On Wednesday afternoon, while I was watering the garden, I saw Matthew's car pull in. My heart raced, not with joy anymore, but with anxiety. When he got out of the car with Brooke, I knew the moment I feared most had arrived. "Hi, Mom," Matthew forced a smile, the smile he had practiced since getting married. Brooke followed, carrying a thick folder, radiating a smugness that made my skin crawl. "Let us come in. We want to discuss something important with—" I invited them to sit in the living room, the very place where Matthew had played with toy cars for hours, where I read him stories every night, where we watched cartoons together. Now that sacred space had turned into a courtroom, and I was the defendant. "Mom, we're very worried about you," Matthew began in a strange, patronizing tone. "Brooke and I think you need support managing your finances. At your age, feeling overwhelmed by many responsibilities is normal." Brooke opened the folder like a commander unfolding battle maps. "Mom, Suzanne, we've consulted a few financial specialists for older adults. Everyone says the best thing is to simplify the assets, concentrating everything in safer, easier to manage options." "Which specialists?" I asked, feigning confusion while my blood boiled inside. Why is it that I haven't spoken to any specialists at all? I recorded every word, every gesture, exactly as attorney Robert Hayes had advised. Matthew jumped in, using that patient tone people use with children. "Exactly because you haven't had proper advice. Brooke knows highly qualified people who can help you protect your money and secure your future." Brooke pulled out a stack of papers and spread them on the table like a hand of cards. "Take a look. This is a very convenient proposal. An investment fund with guaranteed returns. Better than letting money sit in real estate that takes maintenance and causes headaches." I pretended to scrutinize with the tired eyes of a confused old woman, but in fact I was memorizing every detail. The document said, "Sell my house, then transfer the money into a joint account so Matthew and Brooke would have decision-making power over the portfolio to protect me from potential scams. If I sell the house, where would I live?" I asked, my voice trembling exactly the way they expected from a fragile grandma. Brooke smiled with that well-polished fake sweetness. "Oh, Mom, don't worry. We've found a very nice assisted living, a senior care center with medical care 24/7. You'd be much safer and more comfortable there. A nursing home." The words rang in my head like funeral bells. There was the plan. Strip me of my house, seize the money, lock me away somewhere I wouldn't be in their way, all wrapped in glossy paper labeled "concern." "A nursing home," I repeated, letting my voice waver a little. "But son, I'm fine in my own home. This is where our memories are." Brooke and Matthew exchanged that conspiratorial glance I had learned to recognize the silent language of schemers. "Mom, we know it's hard, but think it through." Matthew leaned in, offering a benevolent smile. "There you'd have friends, activities, doctors, and we could stop by whenever we want without worrying about your safety. Whenever we want. Not every day. Not regularly when convenient, like visiting a boarded pet." The anger rose so high I had to rein in my performance as a frail old lady. Brooke pulled out more papers. "We've run the numbers, sell the house plus a few smart investments, and you'll live very comfortably without having to worry about anything. We'll handle all the paperwork and make the financial decisions." The final trap came into focus. They would hold the reins of my money while I withered in a facility, living on crumbs of attention. A brilliantly cruel plan, executed with the precision of financial surgeons. "What if I don't want to sell?" I asked softly, as if the thought had just occurred to me. Brooke sighed theatrically, like a patient teacher explaining math to a slow child. "Mom, we understand it's hard. But at your age, living alone in such a big house isn't safe. What if you fall and no one knows? Or if someone takes advantage of your kindness and scams you?" The irony being lectured about scammers by the person trying to scam. "I need time to think. I need time to think. I rubbed my temples as if I had a headache. It's a lot to process at once. Matthew stood and hugged me, a hug as cold as Judas's kiss rather than a son's affection. "Of course, Mom, but don't take too long," he said. Brooke stacked the documents with the satisfaction of someone who thinks she's already won. After they left, I collapsed into a chair, feeling as if I'd just survived a hurricane. My hands shook, not from age but from fury held in. I picked up the phone and called attorney Robert Hayes immediately. "Mr. Hayes, they just came. Exactly as you predicted. They want me to sell everything, put me in a facility, and take over the money." His voice was calm but firm. "Miss Suzanne, this is the critical part. Do not sign anything at all, no matter how much pressure they apply. If possible, record all future conversations. We need to document their true intent." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around the house like a ghost, touching each object with a story. The rocking chair where I nursed Matthew, the table where we did homework together, the piano I played to lull him through nightmares. All of it would be sold off and scattered to feed the greed of someone who came later, who knew nothing of the days when Matthew was most vulnerable and needed his mother, a person who saw motherly love only as an obstacle on the road to a money dream. The next morning, Rachel arrived early with a digital voice recorder her grandchild had lent her. "It's really easy to use," she showed me. "Press this button and it records for 8 hours straight. Slip it in your purse or apron pocket. If they come back with proposals, we'll have their words." For 3 days, I kept a tense calm, waiting for the hunter's next move. On Friday afternoon, the phone rang. Brooke, her voice sugary with manipulation. "Have you thought about the proposal, Mom? We found a beautiful place in assisted living, but we need to reserve soon because there's a wait list." The fake urgency in her voice confirmed they were eager to close early, before I could consult anyone. "Yes, I've thought a lot," I answered with my best performance as a hesitant old lady. "Can you come by tomorrow to explain the details again?" At my age, I sometimes forget. I could practically see her triumphant smile through the phone. "Yes, Mom, tomorrow afternoon we'll bring all the paperwork. You'll see this is the best decision for everyone." Best for everyone, as if being stripped of my home and freedom were a favor to me. On Saturday afternoon, they arrived right on time, like vultures keeping a date with carrion. This time they brought Paul the notary, who had shown up at my door the previous week. A thin man with a sparse mustache and a leather briefcase, his eyes roving around my house like an appraiser's while he feigned courtesy. "Miss Suzanne, very pleased to see you again." He smiled without his eyes. "I'm prepared to streamline all procedures. The faster we resolve this, the fewer complications. Before we begin, I'd like permission to audio, video, record this discussion to protect all parties. Does everyone agree?" I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one where I used to rock baby Matthew and let them stage their show of fake concern. "Mom, we brought the paperwork ready." Matthew laid the sheets on the table. "You just need to sign here, here, and here, and we'll handle the rest." His finger pointed at dotted lines like crosses in a graveyard. Brooke sat right next to me, the kind of hard sell proximity used by aggressive salespeople. "Look, photos of where you'll live, lovely gardens, a TV room, even yoga classes for seniors." Brooke showed a few pictures, a place that looked more like a hospital in disguise than a home. Paul opened his briefcase and ceremoniously pulled out a seal, blue ink, and a set of notary letterhead forms. "Ma'am, these documents are drafted perfectly to protect your interests. A property sale, fund transfer into a family trust, and authorization for relatives to manage your finances if you become incapacitated. Incapacitated. The word hit me like a slap. I smiled very slightly, a smile only I understood, and looked up. Then let's start by reading aloud each clause, so the audio-video record captures everything in full as required, shall we? They had even prepared the next step. If one day I dared to oppose their decisions, they'd try to have me declared cognitively incompetent. The plan was so meticulous it gave me chills. What if later on I change my mind? I asked on purpose, my voice shaking, playing the role of a dotty old woman to perfection. Paul and Brooke exchanged a look, the kind the recorder couldn't capture, but I etched it into my memory as proof of their collusion. Oh, Mom, these decisions are meant to be final for your own protection, Brooke said with exaggerated patience. If you could change your mind all the time, bad actors could take advantage and trick you into signing things that aren't good for you. Bad actors. How ironic. The very person stripping me of everything was preaching about people who take advantage. I had to bite my tongue not to laugh bitterly. And also, Mom, Matthew held my hand with an artificially gentle touch, think how much peace of mind we'll have knowing you're safe and cared for. We won't have to worry about you anymore. Won't have to worry about you anymore, translated from the language of manipulators. It means, we won't have to pretend to love you once we control the money. My tears burst out, not an act anymore. It was the real pain of a mother betrayed by the child she had lovingly raised. Don't cry, ma'am, Paul soothed with professional coldness. Feeling emotional during major changes is normal. You'll feel more at peace afterward. He pulled out a gold-plated pen and set it in front of me like a gun to my throat. I took the pen, my hand shaking, and moved it toward the first sheet. The air was taut like a violin string. My two executioners held their breath, waiting for the moment of final triumph. Brooke leaned in like a vampire at a victim's throat. Right then, like an angel knocking at the door, the doorbell rang. "Expecting anyone?" Paul snapped, irritation showing. "No," I answered, standing up slowly. "Probably a neighbor. On Mr. Hayes's advice, I had proactively asked the county prosecutor's office to send an investigator to witness due to signs of elder fraud. I opened the door. Rachel stood there with attorney Robert Hayes and an accompanying investigator carrying a camera for record-keeping. "Good afternoon, Suzanne," Rachel smiled, giving me instant strength. "Hope we're not too late." "Come in," I said, feeling like the cavalry had arrived. Attorney Hayes entered with the presence only seasoned lawyers have. The other man followed, lifting the camera. Matthew turned pale. Brooke stumbled to gather the stack of documents, and Paul stood frozen like a pillar of salt. "What's going on, Mom?" Matthew asked, tense. "Hello, everyone," Mr. Hayes said politely. "I represent Miss Suzanne. As scheduled for today, I'll be supervising this legal transaction together with the investigator from the prosecutor's office. I trust all documents are in proper order and that my client has had sufficient time to review them with independent counsel." The silence that followed was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Paul hastily pocketed the gold-plated pen as if it burned. Brooke glanced at the door, measuring an escape route. "Excuse me, and you are?" Paul tried to salvage his authority. Hayes smiled the way a man does after unmasking too many frauds to count. "Robert Hayes, attorney for Elder Asset Protection. And this is Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Daniel Harris from the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, in charge of crimes targeting vulnerable people. At Mr. Hayes's request, we're here to witness and record due to indications of elder fraud." Brooks' face shifted from confident predator to chalk white in seconds. Paul snapped his briefcase shut with clumsy motions, as if stuffing in incriminating evidence. Matthew stood stock still, looking from them to me as if, for the first time in months, he truly saw his mother. "Counsel," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks, "I'm glad you arrived in time. I was about to sign some papers and wanted to make sure everything is proper." I set the recorder on the table like a grenade with the pin pulled. The investigator switched on the camera per protocol. "Ma'am, could you explain what kind of documents they're asking you to sign and under what circumstances?" His voice carried legal authority that makes the guilty tremble. Brooke tried to cut in with a forced laugh. "Oh, it must be a misunderstanding. We're just helping my mother-in-law with some convenient paperwork." "Paperwork?" I repeated, smiling to my own surprise. "You call it paperwork to make me sell my house, hand over all my money, and go into a nursing facility so the two of you can control all the assets?" Paul sprang up, aiming to slip away. "Perhaps there's been a mistake. I only came to provide notary services." Mr. Brooks was already standing neatly in the doorway. "Hold on, colleague. I'd like to see the documents you brought ready. This is part of an investigation into real estate fraud." Right then, I played my ace. I went to the bedroom, carried out the safe, opened it in front of everyone, and took out the ranch deed. I spread the papers on the table, savoring each second of confusion on the predators' faces. "Isn't this interesting?" I said. "My late husband left me a ranch of about 500 acres. I simply hadn't mentioned it yet. Mr. Hayes, please read the most recent appraised value." Attorney Hayes took the file, a smile of poetic justice on his lips. "According to the latest appraisal, the market value of this ranch is in the many millions of dollars range, not counting the cattle, agricultural machinery, and auxiliary structures." Absolute silence. Brooks' mouth hung open like a stranded fish. Matthew stared at the paper like an extraterrestrial object. "Tens of millions," I repeated, savoring each word. "And yet you two were so worried about my poverty and my incompetence, how kind." My voice dripped with bittersweet sarcasm. Paul flailed one last time. "Ma'am, that changes everything. You need specialists to manage a portfolio of that size." But Mr. Brooks was already photographing all the documents they had brought. "Exactly." I beamed. "Which is why a week ago I engaged Mr. Hayes to handle all my legal and financial matters. But thank you for your concern." At last, Brooke found her voice, raspy like a wounded crow. "Mom, we didn't know. I mean, we just wanted to help." "Help me?" I stood, reclaiming the dignity I thought I'd lost. "Help by selling my house without asking, locking me in a facility against my will, and stealing my right to decide my own life?" Matthew spoke, and for the first time in months, I heard my real son. "Mom, we thought it was what's best for you." His eyes were wet. I didn't know if it was remorse or frustration at having the game exposed. "What's best for me," I softened, "would have been to ask what I wanted. What's best for me would have been to respect my decisions. What's best for me would have been to see me as your mother, not an obstacle to your happiness." Mr. Hayes placed a protective hand on my shoulder. "Miss Suzanne, I think it's time for everyone to leave. We have sufficient documentation to proceed legally, if necessary." Paul practically ran for the door. Brooke slunk after him, not bothering to keep the considerate daughter-in-law mask. Matthew lingered a few seconds, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Mom, can we talk later?" For the first time, the question sounded real and bare. I nodded slowly, promising nothing. When they left, I stayed with my true allies, Rachel, Mr. Hayes, and Mr. Brooks. For the first time in months, I felt safe in my own home. 3 months later, I sat on the ranch porch, watching sunset turn my land orange. It was also when I turned 70, a birthday gift of freedom I gave myself. Matthew visited once a week, alone, trying to mend the bond nearly destroyed by pleasing a woman who saw him only as a ladder to money. Brooke called many times, all went to voicemail. People say they divorced when she realized I wasn't the weak, poor widow she'd imagined. Now I help older women facing similar situations. My home has become a refuge where they can tell their stories and receive free legal guidance. I've learned that silence can be gold, but speaking up at the right time is diamond. At 69, I finally understood my husband's last words. I had more than I thought, and I was stronger than I believed. 6 months after that life-changing afternoon, I sat on the porch with a hot cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over my 500 acres of freedom. The scent of freshly ground coffee mingled with the orange blossoms I planted last week, each morning a symphony reminding me why I had to fight. The ranch's main house became something I'd never imagined, a haven for women like me. Every week, I receive letters, phone calls, and visits. They hear my story and recognize their own nightmare in it. And they leave with the one thing I most want to give, the strength to say, "No, Miss Suzanne," they say in trembling voices. "My daughter-in-law is forcing me to sell my house. Oh, my son says I can't handle my money anymore." Yesterday, Margaret, a 73-year-old widow, came to my ranch. Her children had convinced a court to declare her incapable of managing her assets. She walked in with a small suitcase and the heavy weight of family betrayal. "Miss Suzanne," she said through tears, "my own children keep me under house arrest. They take my pension and won't let me go out alone. They say it's for my own good." I seated her in the same rocking chair where I once cried from loneliness, poured chamomile tea into a porcelain cup, and told her my whole story. I saw hope return to her eyes for the first time in months. "Can I really take back control of my life?" she asked, like a lost child finding the way home. "Not only can you," I held her wrinkled hands, "it's your right, and you are not alone." The next morning, Attorney Robert Hayes reviewed Margaret's file. We found multiple procedural irregularities in the incapacity ruling enough to overturn it. Now, Margaret smiles every day, and her children have been forced to return the funds they had withdrawn to manage for safety. My story spread like wildfire across the region. Reporters came to interview me. Social workers invited me to speak to the community. I received letters from all over, even Spain and Argentina. "Your courage inspired me to defend my rights," a woman in Madrid wrote. Another in Buenos Aires thanked me. "Thanks to your example, my family no longer treats me as invisible." But not everything was easy. Matthew, my son, visited every Sunday by himself, trying to rebuild the bridge his wife had blown up. The first visits were awkward, embarrassed silences, apologies that sounded memorized. Gradually, I saw the child he once was flicker behind the eyes of the man who had let someone else betray his mother. 2 weeks ago, as the two of us walked past the barns, he said, "Mom, I don't know how to apologize to you for what I did." It's like I was hypnotized, unable to see the obvious. His tears were real, and for the first time since the wedding, I recognized my child. "Son," I stopped and looked him straight in the eyes. "Forgiveness isn't asked for. It's earned, and people prove it with actions, not words." He nodded, understanding that reconciliation would be a long journey, one that required patience and evidence of remorse. As for Brooke, she disappeared from our lives as quickly as she had arrived. Rachel, my best friend, who has ears everywhere, said Brooke planned to file for divorce to claim half the assets, but Matthew had legally protected everything on my advice. She left town without saying goodbye, probably to look for her next target. Paul, the slippery notary, lost his license after Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Daniel Harris submitted evidence of a ring that defrauded older adults. The recording of the conversation at my home was the key, helping dismantle the network that had drained money from dozens of elderly people in the area. Rachel remains my companion. Now she lives in one of the ranch's guest houses, not as hired help, but as the sister I chose. Together we run the refuge we established, organize workshops on the rights of older adults, and plan trips we never had the chance to take when we were young. Who would have thought that at 70 we'd become activists? Rachel joked, as the two of us sorted through a table piled with applications for legal support. I smiled, remembering the timid woman I was a year ago, content with crumbs of attention, letting others decide my fate. Attorney Hayes is no longer just my lawyer, he has become the legal director of our foundation. We've pushed through changes to several local regulations that better protect older adults and are working with federal lawmakers on broader reforms. Miss Suzanne, he said at our most recent meeting, in 6 months, you've done more for elders' rights than many organizations have done in decades. Every night before bed, I walk through the garden reflecting on the road traveled. Sometimes I find handwritten letters placed in the mailbox under the big oak left by women who have stayed here. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to reclaim my dignity, one letter said. Another read, thank you for showing me that self-respect has no expiration date. Tomorrow, a group of ladies from California will come to hear our story and learn how to build similar shelters in their cities. The movement is spreading like ripples on a pond, touching lives I never thought I could reach. At 69, I realized old age isn't the end of the story sometimes, it's the beginning of the strongest chapter. I learned that the wisdom accumulated over decades is a weapon, more powerful than youth, that lost dignity can always be won back if we dare to fight for it. My name is Suzanne, 69 years old, and this is my Declaration of Independence. I will never again let anyone make me feel invisible, useless, or disposable. If my story inspires even one woman to raise her voice against abuse and manipulation, then every tear, every betrayal, every moment of pain will have been worth it. In the end, I realized my late husband was right. I was stronger than I thought, and I had more than I believed. I just needed to remember who I really was. Perhaps the most powerful thing in Suzanne's story isn't the ranch, nor the legal papers, but the moment she stood up straight and named what she deserved: dignity, boundaries, and love that knows respect. Family is where love begins, but it's also where limits must be set. Forgiveness can open a door, but trust only returns with action. And sometimes, learning to say no is how we say yes to our own lives, to peace, autonomy, and self-respect. What do you think of Suzanne's choice? If you were in her place, what would you do when relatives help but want control? In your view, what do healthy boundaries in a family look like, especially with aging parents? And what concrete actions should accompany an apology to truly heal? Please share your perspective or experience in the comments. Your story might strengthen someone who needs it. If you find these values meaningful, join us so you don't miss the next stories. We'll keep listening, learning, and growing together, so each of us can find our voice again in our own home.